The auctioneer stopped mid-sentence when the cage door bowed outward. A retired military K-9 named Brutus stood behind the bars. Muzzled, double-chained, and written off in red ink as a liability no family should ever touch. But the way he stared through the room did not look like failure. It looked like a warning. His shoulders rolled under a faded tactical vest. His torn ear flicked at every metal sound. And his scarred neck stayed angled over one old leather collar hidden beneath new steel. Mason Cole raised 2 fingers from the bitter row. And guards moved as if they had been waiting for permission. A taser came up. Then another. Captain Price ordered the dog transferred for private assessment before the buyers got nervous. That was when Lily Reed stepped out from behind the transport crates. She was young, soaked from the rain, and wearing a marine jacket too large for her narrow shoulders. She had no bidder badge, no uniform, no weapon, only a brass key pressed against her fist and a look that made the handlers hesitate. The Malinois saw her. His growl changed. It dropped out of anger and into something older, deeper, almost wounded. Lily moved toward the yellow line. People shouted at her to stop, but their voices blurred under the thunder of the dog's breath. She lowered herself slowly. Just as Thomas Reed had once described in a notebook she did not yet understand. No challenge, no command, no fear offered like fuel. The dog surged forward, chains jerking hard enough to pull a handler off balance. Lily lifted the key toward the tiny lock tucked below the steel collar. Mason's calm cracked just enough for Captain Price to notice. For a single heartbeat, everyone in that hall understood the danger was not only in the dog, it was in the collar, in the key, and in the man who suddenly wanted both buried. Lily reached closer. The Malinois stopped inches from her hand, trembling as if memory had caught him by the throat. If you believe some heroes wear collars instead of medals, tell me in the comments. Share this story. And subscribe before we uncover why Thomas Reed left that key and why one powerful man feared the lock. 3 hours earlier, Lily had boarded a bus with $400 and a father's unfinished warning burning in her pocket. 3 hours before Lily Reed crossed the yellow line, she was sitting near the back of a county bus, holding her father's marine jacket like it was the last warm thing left in the world. Rain streaked the windows and blurred the training center beyond the highway, turning its fences and watch lights into something that looked less like a place for retired dogs than a place where stories went to disappear. In her lap lay a brown envelope with $412, a folded photograph, and the brass key Thomas Reed had taped beneath his medicine box before he died. Lily knew the money would not win anything in a room full of defense contractors and private security buyers. She had not come to outbid them. She had come because her father had left instructions no official file had ever mentioned. Thomas had been a Marine who returned home with a cane, pain pills, and silences that filled whole rooms. He could repair a sink with one hand and sit through dinner without saying where his mind had gone. Yet when sleep turned against him, he always called one name, Atlas. Not Brutus, not Asset. Atlas. Lily had grown up hearing that name like a secret prayer from the hallway. The letters from the service said the dog had been reassigned, but Thomas never believed anything that sounded so clean. After the funeral, Lily found the key and a torn strip of notebook paper folded beneath the pill tray. Most of the writing had smeared, but 3 words stayed sharp enough to hurt. Cole knows why. For weeks, she thought Cole might be a location, a radio call sign, maybe a memory broken loose from combat. Then she saw the online auction notice for a dog called Brutus, with a torn ear, a pale scar along the muzzle, and an old leather collar half hidden beneath new steel. The contact line at the bottom carried the name Mason Cole Security. Her grief stopped being soft and became something edged. At the registration gate, Lily learned how little a daughter weighed against paperwork. The woman at the table glanced at her damp boots and envelope, then slid the forms back without looking at the photograph of Thomas in uniform. The auction was for approved buyers only. No bidder credential. No contractor license. No military sponsor. No access. Captain Harlan Price arrived when Lily refused to step aside. He was not cruel in the loud way Mason would be later. He was worse in a quieter way. Tired. Procedural. Convinced that sympathy was what careless people mistook for evidence. He recognized Thomas Reed's name, but only as a closed case attached to an unstable K9. To him, Lily was grief wearing an old jacket. Mason Cole approached while Price was still speaking. Neat coat, dry beneath the awning. Expensive shoes, untouched by mud. He studied Lily's envelope with a smile that never reached his eyes and measured her poverty before he measured her courage. He did not need to threaten her. The room had already taught her she had no standing. No money, and no right to claim a dog the government had filed away as a liability. Then a handler led Brutus past the far kennel. Lily saw the Malinois slow at Mason's scent. Not bark, not panic. Recognition. His scarred head lowered. His body became still. And for one moment, the dog looked less afraid of the man than ready to remember him. That was the first thing no report could explain. The second came when Lily noticed the old collar. It was not decoration, and not neglect. A small medical tag described it as a stabilizing collar from a combat neck injury, which meant no handler could remove it casually under public supervision. Mason could not simply cut it off in front of witnesses without owning the damage if Atlas broke under sedation, or if something hidden was found. He needed to buy the dog, take him private, and erase the collar where no daughter, no caretaker, and no officer could ask why. Lily touched the key beneath her jacket and decided she would not leave first. Inside the auction hall, the story Mason Cole wanted everyone to believe was printed in black ink and red stamps. Brutus, male Belgian Malinois. Retired military working dog. High aggression history. Unsafe for adoption. Transfer restricted to approved security contractors. Captain Price read the summary from a folder thick enough to look official and cold enough to feel final. Every line made the dog less like a soldier and more like damaged equipment. 2 handler bites during collar work. 1 destroyed kennel latch. 3 failed rehabilitation attempts. Extreme response to restraint. Recommended for controlled disposal sale. The buyers nodded because the words sounded clean. And clean words made cruelty easier to accept. Lily stood near the rear wall, half hidden behind a row of empty transport crates. Listening to strangers reduce the name her father had whispered in nightmares into a risk category. Mason did not interrupt. He did not need to. The file was doing his work. What the folder did not say was what Lily began to see with her own eyes. Atlas did not snarl at the old caretaker moving a mop along the aisle. He did not throw himself at the teenage assistant carrying water bowls. He did not even react when a child beyond the ropes dropped a candy wrapper and gasped. His rage had a shape. It rose only when metal clicked near his neck. When someone reached toward the layered collars, or when the black medical case came within sight of the cage. Then his whole body locked. The scar behind his left ear tightened. His paws braced as though the floor had become sand under gunfire. Lily had watched her father wake the same way when a truck backfired outside their house. Suddenly, somewhere else, defending something no one else could see. This was not madness. It was memory with teeth. Near the kennel doors, Alvarez, The gray-haired caretaker paused beside Lily without looking directly at her. He offered no grand confession, only small facts that made the official story crack. The dog had arrived years ago with the old leather already on him. Someone had called it a stabilizing collar from a combat neck injury, and that label kept junior handlers from cutting it off. Every time Mason's people requested a replacement, Atlas fought as if they were touching a grave. Once, Alvarez said, an archive training clip played by mistake on a monitor before it was deleted. A Marine had called the dog Atlas, and the Malinois had dropped flat at his boots. Calm as church, Alvarez never saw the clip again. He never knew what was hidden. He only knew the name Brutus had come later. After Mason began visiting, the more Lily watched, the more the file looked staged. The reported attacks were not random. The first bite happened during a collar inspection. The second during a sedation prep ordered by a private contractor. The broken kennel latch came after a scan for unauthorized hardware. Each incident made Atlas seem less adoptable and more useful to the one buyer who wanted him cheap. Mason could not remove the collar in public because the medical tag protected it, and because too many witnesses would see whatever Thomas had sealed beneath the leather. He needed ownership, privacy, and a report ugly enough to make everyone grateful when he took the problem away. Price, ashamed of risk and eager for order, believed the pages. Lily believed the dog. Price moved the sale to a private assessment area. The change sounded procedural, but the room shifted with it. Guards rolled out the black case. A handler tested a control pole. Another man opened a plastic package containing a new steel collar without the old medical tag. Atlas saw it and lowered his head over the leather at his throat. Not submissive, not beaten, but guarding. His growl did not spread across the room anymore. It narrowed toward the case. The pole. The men who had come for the only thing Thomas had left him to protect. Mason stood behind Price, confident again, because authority had returned to his side. He had made the dog a danger on paper. Now paper was about to give him the dog. Lily felt the key against her skin and understood the last honest moment was arriving. If she waited, Atlas would be drugged, stripped, renamed forever. And Thomas Reed's final warning would die inside a locked collar. She stepped from behind the crates as the taser lights lifted. For the first time, Atlas looked past the handlers and found her. And if this soldier's loyalty already has you leaning closer, leave a comment for Atlas. Share his story. And subscribe. Because in the next breath, Lily is going to cross the line no one else dares. Lily stepped out from behind the transport crates before the handler could lower the control pole over Atlas's neck. The private assessment area sat a few yards from the auction floor, separated by a rolling steel gate. Atlas stood inside that box with his head low, the black medical case on one side and the replacement collar on the other. Taser lights made 2 red dots on his chest. Everyone seemed to be waiting for the dog to make the final mistake that would justify every ugly word in the folder. Captain Price turned when Lily crossed the paint, but his order came too late. A guard caught her jacket and lost his grip when the rain-slick fabric slid from his fingers. Mason Cole did not move. He watched her like a man watching a child reach toward a live wire. Lily heard boots shifting behind her, the click of a taser charging, and Atlas's growl dropping into a sound that belonged under thunder. She kept walking until her knees touched concrete. She remembered her father's notebook. No hard eye contact, no raised hand, no command unless the dog already trusted the voice. She lowered her gaze to Atlas's paws and turned her left shoulder so the sleeve of Thomas Reed's jacket faced him. Rain, old canvas, machine oil, and something deeper lifted from the cloth. Atlas lunged before anyone could stop him. The chain snapped tight. One handler fell sideways into the gate. The taser hummed. Lily did not reach for his face. She slid her hand under the newer steel collar, searching by touch for the cracked leather hidden beneath it. The lock was smaller than she expected. Atlas's muzzle hovered inches from her wrist, the steel cage over his teeth, scraping her sleeve. His breath came hot and broken. For 1 second, her fingers shook so badly the key missed the slot. Mason finally stepped forward, suddenly no longer patient, suddenly desperate to stop her before the lock gave way. Price saw that change, and doubt crossed his face. Lily pushed the key again. This time it seated. She turned it. The click was tiny, almost gentle. It sounded nothing like justice. It sounded like an old secret deciding whether the world deserved to hear it. The leather loosened. A folded metal tag slid from a hidden pocket and struck the floor between Lily and Atlas. The engraved letters faced up under the white light. Atlas, not Brutus. Not the name on the bidder sheet. Not the name stamped onto the reports. The room saw it before anyone could explain it away. Atlas froze in the middle of his own fury. The growl cut off inside him. His ears lifted, then trembled. His eyes moved from the taser to Lily's hand, from her hand to the jacket, from the jacket to her face. He inhaled once, long and searching. Something passed through him that no file could measure. Years of wrong names, wrong hands, wrong orders loosened at once. He took 1 step toward her. But it was not an attack anymore. It was recognition trying not to collapse under its own weight. Thomas had once written that Atlas could find him in smoke because a dog did not remember men the way men remembered themselves. A dog remembered breath, blood, fear, salt, and home. Lily carried none of Thomas's rank, none of his scars, none of his war. Yet some part of his life was alive in her skin and under the rain in his jacket. Atlas lowered his head to her palm. A sound came through the muzzle, small and wounded. Then the dog folded down before her, chest against the concrete. His body no longer a weapon, but a soldier who had held position until family arrived. No one moved. Even the handlers seemed ashamed of their gloves. Lily slipped the tag free and saw another seam inside the collar, thinner than a fingernail, tucked where leather overlapped leather. Atlas nudged it with his nose, guiding her. Her fingers found a narrow black chip sealed beneath a flap that had been stitched and restitched by someone who knew how to hide a thing from men who searched too quickly. She lifted it into the light. Mason Cole's voice broke the silence with a demand for the collar, the chip, and the girl to be removed from government property. Mason's mask failed. He was not afraid of a dangerous dog. He was afraid of what a loyal dog had survived to deliver. Atlas rose and placed himself between Lily and Mason. Calm, now. Focused now. He did not snarl at Price or challenge the handlers. His entire body pointed at one man. The truth had not yet been played, but it had already chosen sides. Captain Price did not call for silence. The room gave it to him. After Atlas rose between Lily and Mason Cole, every bidder card, every clipboard, every official stamp seemed suddenly cheap. The Malinois stood with the opened collar hanging loose at his throat, no longer fighting everyone, only watching one man. Mason shouted that the girl had tampered with government property, but his voice carried the wrong kind of fear. It was not fear of being bitten. It was fear of being remembered. Price ordered the tasers lowered and the rolling gate locked. He had spent the morning trusting the file because files were easier than grief. But the tag on the floor made the folder feel poisonous in his hand. Mason moved toward Lily, demanding the chip. and Atlas stepped sideways with one controlled motion. No lung, no teeth, just a trained block, clean enough to shame every report that had called him uncontrollable. For the first time, Price looked at the dog instead of the paperwork. The chip was not some mystery device from a spy movie. Price's own equipment officer recognized it as an old harness camera storage card, the kind used before the unit upgraded its gear. That made the truth harder to dismiss. It belonged to the system that had buried it. A technician brought a reader from the evidence kit, plugged it into a laptop on the auction table, and waited while the corrupted file rebuilt itself in broken flashes of green night vision. Lily kept one hand on Atlas, feeling him brace before the sound even played. The first image was dust, then headlights, then the low angle of a dog moving between boots, tire, and walls pocked by old rounds. Thomas Reed's voice came through the static, younger but unmistakable to Lily, telling Atlas to hold. The dog stopped beside an ambulance with no plate. His nose found the rear ramp, and the camera tilted toward a wire hidden under dried mud. Thomas warned the convoy to reroute. He had not led anyone into danger. He had found the trap before the trap found them. A second voice cut across the radio, sharper, impatient, carrying the easy authority of a man not standing where bullets could reach him. Mason Cole ordered the team forward. He claimed the route was cleared, claimed the delay would compromise the mission, claimed command had approved the movement. On the edge of the frame, a canvas-covered truck waited with its lights off. Too heavy for a medical escort, too important for Mason to leave behind. Thomas refused. Lily heard her father say the manifest was false. Then the alley opened fire. The video dissolved into smoke, muzzle flashes, and the brutal rhythm of men calling for help. Atlas drove through the chaos, dragging one Marine by the vest, then turning back before anyone ordered him. The camera slammed against concrete when Thomas fell near the ambulance. Blood crossed the lens in a dark smear. Thomas pulled himself close to Atlas, not to save his own body, but to unclip the camera housing. His hands shook as he removed the card and pushed it into the collar's inner seam. The next sound was Thomas breathing through pain. He whispered Atlas's name. Then words Lily had never heard from any official: "Take it home." The frame blacked out after that. But the message was complete. Thomas Reed had not caused the disaster. He had challenged the lie before it killed men. Mason had protected an unauthorized cargo run and let the blame fall on a wounded Marine who came home too tired, too medicated, and too alone to fight a contractor with lawyers. Mason tried to laugh, but no one joined him. He said combat footage could be misread, that trauma made soldiers unreliable, that Thomas had been unstable long before the ambush. Lily turned from the screen slowly. She did not scream. She did not need to. The same man who had called her father unreliable had spent years renaming his dog, rewriting incidents, and steering a public auction toward a private handoff. The pattern was no longer suspicious. It was confession by paperwork. Price opened the behavioral file again, and the dates lined up with terrible neatness. First collar inspection. First bite, sedation request. Second bite, hardware scan. Broken latch, replacement order. Failed rehabilitation. Every mark against Atlas followed an attempt to reach what Thomas had hidden. The dog had not been defending aggression. He had been defending evidence. Alvarez, standing near the back with his cap in his hands, looked less like a witness than a man, ashamed of all the years he had doubted his own eyes. The last piece came from Mason himself. When Price ordered the card, copied and secured, Mason reached for his phone before any investigator had been called. Atlas moved first. Crossing the space without sound and standing between Mason and the exit, the Malinois did not snarl. He held position with a discipline so complete it turned the accusation of danger inside out. Guards took Mason's phone. On the screen was an unsent message to an unknown number if caller opened. Destroy transfer records. That was enough. Price canceled the auction, sealed the haul, and called military investigators through a line Mason could not influence. The bidders who had come to buy a damaged dog now stood around the table watching a fallen Marine's honor climb out of static and dust. Lily knelt beside Atlas as the chip was placed into an evidence sleeve. Relief should have felt clean. Instead, it hurt. Because justice was arriving with years of apologies it could never make, Atlas pressed his scarred head against Lily's knee. And she understood the fight was not over. The chip would clear Thomas. But the system might still keep Atlas as evidence. She had opened the collar. Now she had to make them see the soldier inside it as family. Not property. Not evidence. By sunrise. The auction hall no longer sounded like a place where men bought dogs. Evidence markers dotted the concrete where chains had scraped and bidder cards had fallen. Military investigators moved carefully, as if the floor itself could testify. Mason Cole sat inside a federal vehicle, his expensive coat wrinkled by rain, his hands bound where contracts had once made him untouchable. He never looked at Lily. He watched Atlas through the window. Because the dog he had tried to erase had become the witness that ended him before a single courtroom opened. Price watched in heavy silence beside her. Captain Price signed the suspension order with a hand that did not quite trust itself. Every transfer connected to Mason's company was frozen. Every disposal recommendation recalled. Every K9 sold through that channel flagged for review. Price had begun the day believing files protected people. Now he understood that files could bury them just as neatly. He removed the steel collar from Atlas slowly, under camera lights and witness forms, leaving the old leather untouched until it was photographed. When the heavy ring came free, Atlas lowered his head and breathed like a battlefield had finally loosened its grip inside. The hearings took weeks, and Lily attended all of them in Thomas's faded jacket. She sat beneath fluorescent lights while officers replayed footage, compared timestamps, studied radio logs, and rebuilt the night her father had carried alone for years. The corrected report did not bring back the birthdays he missed inside his own mind, or the dinners where shame sat at the table before food. Still, when Thomas Reed's name was cleared and his citation restored, Lily felt the room change. Men who had once treated him like damage stood because honor had finally found its way back home again. Atlas faced his own examination with the patience of someone who had nothing left to prove. Independent K9 specialists watched him walk, rest, respond, and recover. They tested sounds, scents, restraints, and the careful presence of Lily's hand on his shoulder. The conclusion was simple enough to make every old label look cruel. Atlas was traumatized. Not feral, protective. Not useless, wounded. Not lost. His service name was restored as Atlas Reed, retired from duty and released to family care. Lily signed the adoption papers with tears blurring the line where ownership should have been replaced by belonging long ago. The first evening at Thomas's house was quiet in a way that made Lily afraid to move. Atlas stepped inside before her, nose low, crossing rooms by scent instead of sight. He found boot leather near the door, coffee in the kitchen walls, medicine in the bedroom air, and Thomas everywhere the world had forgotten to dust. At the dresser, he paused and scratched once at the bottom drawer. Lily opened it and found a cassette wrapped inside a pharmacy receipt, waiting where grief had never thought to look. The recorder on the counter still worked after one stubborn click. Thomas's voice arrived thin and worn, but alive enough to bend Lily over the table. The message was not a confession of war. It was a father's last kindness. He had left the tape for the day Atlas came home, because that would mean the truth had survived fear. He wanted Lily to know the dog had given him more years than he expected. Years to raise her, teach her, fail her sometimes, and love her always. Atlas lay with his head against her knee, listening to the voice he had carried through fire and fences and false names faithfully. When the tape ended, the house did not feel empty anymore. Lily placed Thomas's dog tags on the windowsill and hung the old collar beside his photograph. Not as evidence and not as a wound, but as proof that loyalty could outlast lies. Atlas touched the tags with his nose, circled once beside Lily's chair, and settled at her feet. A truck passed outside, rattling the glass. But he did not rise. The buckle brushed the wall, and he did not flinch. For the first time in years, Atlas slept without guarding a secret alone through the dark night anymore. Lily watched him breathe and understood Thomas had not left her only a story, or a key, or a burden too heavy for one daughter. He had sent home the one soldier who still remembered every road back to love. Morning opened pale across the wet yard, and Lily rested her hand on Atlas's shoulder while the house finally became a home again. Thank you for staying with Atlas and Lily to the end. Share this story. Leave a comment for the K9 warriors who never forgot. And subscribe to walk into the next loyal story with us soon here.